Davos Direct, coming to you from the heart of the Congress Center at the World Economic Forum 2011 with me, Shaili Chopra. Plenty happening here as the days go by. You've got plenty of the top cabinet ministers across the world sort of discussing it out, brainstorming what will be the next big leapfrog for the world. There's some very interesting surprises coming up. We'll discuss that and bring you the best of the financial community right here, from bankers to private equity majors. Let's give you the big names on this show today. Let's talk about the big agenda. Now here, of course, there's a mixed bag when it comes to the global markets, the emerging markets, and of course what's happening in the developed countries. So let's start with telling you what is sort of grabbing headlines. You've got Brazil, India, China that are really leading the pack when it comes to the overall market sentiment, and of course there's tremendous interest generated. But remember, the kind of discussion around renewable energy or clean energy, environment issues is pretty big as well. So that's also one of the key agendas in the markets here. To a great extent, the WEF 2011 is talking about and debating where are some of the economies in Europe going. So from there, we've heard Cameron from the UK saying he does not bet a very bullish idea about 2011 for UK and for that matter in Europe. Many of them are ruling out a potential another bailout or possibly a default, but certainly a lot of them are concerned that the economies here will remain fairly fragile with the exception of Germany. What's happening in terms of inflation? Timothy Geithner today spoke and he said that he was not too worried about inflation across the global markets. Incidentally, it's very, very different from what most of the bankers are saying. Many of them may not be going on record with it, but inflation is a huge concern. The Indian contingent is being quizzed about it non-stop. So a couple of these issues certainly being discussed there, and many is saying that if Davos is optimistic, the worst is yet to come, because they feel every time Davos puts out some good ideas, the red flags are often just hidden. So we've been bringing you some big names right here as suggested by the big voices on the show. So let's start with one of the biggest names in technology. Dell's Michael Dell spoke to ET Now about what is the future of Dell, whether it's emerging markets or the recovery green shoots that are coming in from Europe and the US. Where will technology find its next big story?
We're doing very well. We've reached #1 share, and last year we grew about 80%. We have about a quarter of our global workforce, and very proud of the team and very excited about the growth. We're continuing to invest and add to our team there.
When you say continuing to invest, what are you looking at, and how do you see the market in India shaping up?
Well, it's services, it's going into more verticals, growing our manufacturing base in Chennai. We're in the business of providing productivity and technology solutions. The demand is incredible, and we're quite excited.
Even as you're excited about India, do you sometimes feel that the market could plateau out as the US sees a recovery? Could that change anything for India?
When you have a market like India where you have 50 or 75 computers per 1,000 people, we see really nothing but upside, and so I think it's going to continue to grow for quite some time.
Where does India stand in your global pie, though?
It's broken very nicely into the top 10 and rising fast.
But when you look at the innovation side of the story, do you see India could be a big spoke in the wheel?
More and more, we have engineering teams there and development teams, and we're growing those, and certainly with a quarter of our global workforce, I think it shows, Dell is very serious about India.
What do you think are the new trends in technology in terms of 2011, in terms of tech spend? Will we see a comeback of the West in terms of spending more on technology, or will you see that emerging markets will be the driver despite the potential recovery coming in US and Europe?
We're seeing actually pretty good signs in corporate spending around the world. We're in the business of productivity, and it provides deflation for customers in their costs. And the ROI is so high from these new technologies that they are really compelled to invest in them. So we see that. Certainly mobility, cloud computing, collaboration, virtualization. All these new tools are just creating enormous opportunities for companies and organizations around the world.
When you talk about cloud computing, plenty has been talked about back in India as well. People are sort of warming up to the idea. But do you think India would take some time before that sort of settles in as an easy access space?
I'm not really warming up here in Davos, but we are seeing certainly concerns about security. What we're doing for our customers is building what I would call secure private clouds, where a company wants flexibility, they want to grow very rapidly, and we'll essentially provide that infrastructure for them as a service. And they can subscribe to it, and it allows them to grow, very, very rapidly.
As a person who looks after one of the world's best technology firms and hardware firms, do you think tablets is really the way forward, or is it going to see a skip to something bigger?
Certainly there'll be a lot of tablets, in 2011 from Dell and from others. There'll be a lot of growth there. You can almost think of it as, you have the desktop, you have the notebook, you have the tablet. The tablet's got a long way to go. But let's remember that, there will also be about 380, perhaps 400 million desktops and notebooks sold, this year. So it's a great big market that we participate in.
I know you're cold, so two quick questions. From Davos, do you think that the economic climate is beginning to change a little bit? 2011, though, suggests that there is recovery, but are you truly confident as a corporation head that U.S. and Europe would see some serious recovery?
We're seeing the recovery in corporate spending, certainly, particularly in the U.S., I would say. And, feeling very confident about the year, and I went here feeling quite positive and coming away at least as positive, maybe even a little more so.
Right. And in that sense, would the recovery also be driven by a little more, I would say, resilient thinking about innovation? Is that what's going to be important from a technology point of view?
I think there's more of a risk appetite. Companies are leaning forward. They're starting to invest in new projects, and, there was sort of a hunker down mode for a while there, but I think companies are coming out of that now.
And the interest in Indian technology firms, how big is that?
Well, I think everyone recognizes that India is, coming on, in the global stage in a big way, and, has an enormous role to play in the future of our industry and every industry.
But you've heard of Wipro and Infosys. I mean, those are just a few that we have seen. Do you think the mid-market firms would make a comeback, a big one?
Our fastest growth in India is actually in these small, medium-sized businesses. And, there are millions, tens of millions of new businesses, around the world being created. And their appetite for technology, it's the way that they move forward.
Davos Direct has been promising you the top voices in the global banking industry and the private equity space, the financial whiz kids across the world. KKR's Henry Kravis highlights the Indian opportunity that KKR is now chasing.
Interestingly, there's a very large opportunity in India. The main thing that I find that the mid-market companies need and want is very much access to the capital markets. You have a very shallow or almost non-existent corporate debt market, but a broad equity market. It's not the most effective or efficient use of cost of capital. And as a result, we are able, private equity, to provide debt capital as well as longer-term equity capital that can be efficient, number one. Number two, I find the companies in the mid-market in India wanting to reach out for best practices. That's music to our ears. We have a portfolio of some 60 companies around the world. They want to partner. They want to learn from them. They want to learn from KKR so that we can bring to them best governance practices, put the proper metrics into the business and so on.
You've seen so many large Indian companies do well on a global scale. Do you think the next wave will come from the mid-caps?
Don't forget, large companies were small at one point, and so the smaller companies become bigger companies, and then the natural progression is for them to expand overseas. Yes, you're going to see that as more and more companies are able to emulate the larger Indian companies and see what they have done and see what a partnership can do for them in tying up with a company from overseas. Yes, you're going to see a lot of that.
What challenges do mid-market companies have today in India?
It's the normal challenges that mid-market companies have, or for that matter, large companies. It's everything from your regulatory scheme that you have, your tax scheme, your land issues that you have in acquiring land and the time that it takes, the lack of infrastructure, and then, of course, the lack of capital markets. So I would say that one of the most important for them to help them grow, the rest they can deal with, is the capital market issue. So if the capital markets in fact open up, and I'm talking across the debt and equity, then you will see your mid-market companies grow much more. I've never seen a country that doesn't have a broad and deep capital market continue to expand as an economy. At some point, you start having constraints, and you have to have this available capital.
Well, Henry Kravis there in a rare interview there, speaking to ET Now. Here's another ET Now exclusive. Jamie Dimon has talked about India's inflation situation, and he somewhat does remain concerned about the rising inflation in emerging economies. At the same time, though, he says that if JP Morgan had a chance to buy out a bank in India, he would be right out there not to take 5%, but a big bank whole hog. Here's an excerpt from an interview with Jamie Dimon.
Well, India has been doing great for a while, so I'm still optimistic and bullish about India. And all countries have to get through some times and some issues, so I would just put that something they'll get through hopefully sooner rather than later. I would never lump them all together because I think they're all different, and they're all in different stages of development, and they all have different commodity price issues. And so I don't think necessarily, but I do think that the emerging markets probably have a little more inflation than they have had more inflation than the developed markets. From JP Morgan's standpoint, we're in India permanently, so we're investing for a long time. And so if you look at India's growth and its capabilities and its companies, they're all going to grow dramatically over time, and we're going to be there all the time. You know, India may have its ups and downs in the economy, but that's not going to stop us from investing. The United States, I think, is doing much better, and I think it's rather broad-based, so corporations, mid-sized companies and small businesses, the consumer's doing better. I think quantitative easing makes it more likely to have growth, not less likely to have growth. So I think if America grows, there's still plenty of capital to invest in India. So I don't think it's going to really reduce, a lot of people invest in India, but it will use some in the United States. There's plenty of excess capital around the world.
Jamie Dimon will speak to us in greater detail about the India story, the inflation worry, and the state of Europe, but that's coming up later tonight on Business Tonight. Okay, let's move away from that into what are the other global bankers saying. There's a sort of melee of bankers out here at the Congress Center for the World Economic Forum 2011. We've got voices and heads of NASDAQ, for example, NASDAQ Euronext. We also have voices from Morgan Stanley and the head of investment banking there at Citibank. Listen to all of them.
The growth regions for us will be the Far East remains a significant growth area for us. Asia, in specific China. Brazil is a very large growth market for us. I would say non-Japan Asia is a very large growth market.
I believe we are through the worst of it for the real economy, and we are working hard, policymakers, banks, etc., to solve the debt issue. The debt issue is really fundamental because, when we built Europe, we talked a lot about convergence, and now we have two sets of countries, one converging, strong countries like Germany, one the periphery. The status quo seems to me unbearable, but we are pushing towards greater solidarity, greater cohesion in the Union, and I believe we're going to make it.
Emerging nations are suffering from the unintended consequences of quantitative easing because more money is printed by the US or Europe, more money feeds through via carry trades into the emerging markets, they start overheating, inflation starts to pick up. So what we're now seeing in the emerging world is the opposite of quantitative easing. It's quantitative tightening, QT if you want to call it that. And that means tighter fiscal policy, capital controls, increases in collateral requirements for loans, all that kind of stuff now coming through.
There are plenty more lined up here on Davos Direct with me, Shaili Chopra, coming to you from the World Economic Forum 2011. Stay right there, but we're leaving you with some short quotes, the snappy ones all over when it comes to people like Jean-Claude Trichet and, of course, many others, chief economists of several other important companies. Listen to some of them back in a few seconds.
show brought to you by Religare Global Financial Services, growing with you every day.
Aquaguard Total, Pani Ka Doctor.
Different banking solutions from HSBC, the world's local bank.